Tonight, 76-year-old Michael Stoles remains behind bars, charged with a deadly shooting spree that killed his 49-year-old wife, Bernice. His alleged other victims, the couple's two dogs, including a German Shepherd mix, who triggered the whole thing by defecating on the floor. How dare he? The governor reportedly told the police his wife's ongoing complaint about the dog's behavior was the catalyst for his shooting spree. So, how did this turn so deadly? To discuss this, joining me, Mark Geragos, criminal defense attorney, Pat Brown, criminal profiler, and Jane Velez-Mitchell, obviously our host here on HLN of the self-titled show. She is also the author of Secrets Can Be Murder. Jane, set the story up for us, will you?
Well, this is a case where the little things can make you snap, and apparently that's what happened here. This 76-year-old man who lives in a suburb of Dallas became infuriated because his wife was complaining because their German Shepherd mix had pooped inside the house. And he apparently snapped, according to cops, grabbed his pistol, shot the dog, then proceeded to shoot their second dog, a Rottweiler. At this point, cops say his wife is screaming hysterically, and he turns around and shoots her as well, and then remains with the dead bodies for 3 days. When the wife's employers say, oh, she's not at work, and send cops over to the house, a huge standoff occurs, and he finally surrenders. He's charged with murder, and again, it's such a small thing, a dog pooping inside the house, that cops say led to this basically spree of violence.
Well, Jane, it depends whose house he's pooping in. Now, I've seen Mark's dogs out of line. I've seen him threaten to kill his dogs. I've never actually do anything. So, Mark, I have a question for you. Now, if you were to...
Actually, the key here is, and I don't think Jane touched on it, is it's because he married a woman who was almost 30 years his junior.
That caught my attention,
right.
too.
And that's something that I'm sure that we'll hear lots about.
Well, and it leads me, I look at the guy, I see the picture of him in the screen behind me. Show that picture again if you guys could. He's right. Okay, so he doesn't look well. I mean, he doesn't look right. And I look at that and I think, could he have been bipolar? And then as you age, your manias can get a lot worse. Or could this have been, he's a diabetic apparently, could have this been a stroke, a thalamic stroke? Again, people are engaging very bizarre behavior then. Or could have been a diabetic, what we call encephalopathy. I mean, diabetes is a metabolic condition. If it goes out of control, elderly people get this thing where they're out of their head in their diabetic states. Is that the kind of stuff you'd go toward defending a guy like this? Yeah.
Look, I don't know what this guy's history is, but if his history is that he doesn't have a history of violence or anything else, then you look for some kind of an explanation for it, although diminished capacity you generally can't use, but you can do other things to talk about what caused this and what were the triggers for it. I mean, but obviously,
you bring in experts. You bring in
your experts. You're going to have your Rena shrinks that are going to come in and testify as to this, that, or other. Well, you would never do that.
Not yet. You've offered a couple of times, but not yet.
Yes, you've never signed up for that duty.
But the point is, there are people that can interpret whatever objective findings that can be discovered about this guy.
Right. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if in fact he is guilty of the shooting, and he's 76 years old, what are you going to do with him at this point? He's going to be housed somewhere for the rest of his natural life.
Now, Pat Brown, I know you hate. I've learned through my relationship with you that you hate my explanations for people's behavior. What is your sense of what's going on here?
Well, see, Dr. Drew, what you just pointed out is a thing called history. You know my behavioral history. You know the way I think. This man had a long-term behavioral history where we're going to find he has an issue with power and control and not getting his way. If he doesn't get his way, he gets bent out of shape about it. I have 4 cats in my house. I had 3 student renters, and one of them texted me the other day and said, look, the cat crapped in front of the refrigerator. I still have 4 cats and 3 renters, so I didn't go on a shooting spree with my 9mm because somebody annoyed me or the cat annoyed me. I don't have a history of that. And this man, I'm going to guarantee you, has a history of it. It's just he got to a point in his history where he got fed up, not snapping, but frustrated that he had lost power and control over his dogs and his wife, and said, that's enough. I might as well take you all out.
But, Jane, I'm going to go to you. What do you think? So he had a history of being an irritable, controlling guy. He gets older. He has what we call small vessel vascular disease, which means the brain is sort of breaking down as you age because he has diabetes and things like that. So this irritable, manic-y guy suddenly becomes a killer. Do we understand that as a defense, or should we throw the book at this poor old guy?
Listen, I don't think age has anything to do with it. The fact is that intimate partner violence is a huge problem in this country. One of the leading causes of death, for example, of pregnant women is murder at the hands of the man who impregnated her. And the fact is that people who live together, they go from lovers to becoming enemies. And resentments build up, to use a little 12-step lingo, Dr. Drew. And if they don't deal with those resentments, they fester, and ultimately they can explode in violence. These are people who probably shouldn't have been together, and they stuck together for whatever reason, and it cost this woman her life.
I think what Jane is referring there to, Mark, was a thinly veiled reference to Scott Peterson.
Yeah, I got that, Jane, loud and clear. Loud and clear, Jane.
Is there anything?
It wasn't so, I don't know how thinly veiled that was. I thought maybe it was Scott Peterson and also kind of Jane's view on marriage, but I won't even go there.
You're right on both counts.
Have you got anything to say about it? Have you learned anything through your years of working with these kinds of cases?
Yes, I have, actually, that to try to analyze these things as we do on cable TV, you never get to the truth. So having lived through these things and watching people, and they'll remain nameless, on other cable channels analyze something and say things that they think make sense, and then generally having lived through it, knowing that they bear no relation to reality, it's just too tough to do. You can't know until you get into it.
Do you ever want to get back on TV and set the record straight, or do any of your clients ever ask you to do that?
Well, yes, all the time. But part of the problem with that,
Scott Peterson, want to set it straight?
Well, yeah, is Keith Abloh on any of these this network or a sister network? I read one of his works about Scott Peterson. It was so factually incoherent and had so little connection to the truth that you wondered how he wouldn't have been disciplined by some medical board somewhere.
So just hang a second. For the control of my producers, there's a gauntlet is down. Let's get Keith Abloh in here and Mr. Garagos, and we'll go at it a little bit. But I interrupted you. Finish.
No, and that's part of the problem. I do the same thing. You do the same thing. We sit here, we analyze, we get a little snippet, and then we go off on it. You know, I guess it makes for good TV, but ultimately, does it bear any relation to reality? Probably not.
Pat, do you agree with that?
Well, if we're talking about homicidal men and women who clearly are psychopathic, are we saying, Mr. Garagos, that you'd prefer to believe their pathological lying and manipulations rather than the facts of the case?
Well, actually, you know, Pat, what I've found, especially with Scott, is I would talk to, and it's usually white professional women who have the problem with him. And they would say, well, what about this? And I'd say, well, that didn't happen. And they say, what about this? And I say, well, that isn't it. It was really this. And then they'd always default to, well, I had an ex-boyfriend who was just like him, and I could see where he would have done it too. And
come on now.
How do you
Scott Peterson is guilty, and he's a psychopath. He's a total psychopath. Are you going to tell me he's not a psychopath?
And like I said, a white professional woman, you can't argue on this point.
But remember,
of course not.
according to Pat, Mark, you're a psychopath too, and so am I. So am I. So as far as I know, everyone's a psychopath.
If he thinks Scott Peterson isn't one, I'm going to be questioning that.